Salida, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jim and welcome to the Sounds German review of the new Bannkreis album, Sakrament. This is the debut of Bannkreis, a German folk project helmed by Eric Fish of Subway to Sally fame. Joining him is songstress Johanna Krins and 3 other members who are also part of Subway to Sally. So, in a way, you can barely call this a debut, given all the experience that is already present here. In fact, given 80% of this band are Subway to Sally members, I actually have a hard time not seeing this as sort of a Subway to Sally spin-off. Not only in terms of music, but generally speaking. When I first looked at this album, I thought this was some sort of elaborate prank. Not only are 4 of the 5 members of Bannkreis also members of Subway to Sally, but Bannkreis is the name of an album Subway to Sally released in 1997. And the final track of the album, which is labeled a bonus track even though it apparently is available on every version of this album, is a cover of a Subway to Sally song. Even though I'm not really sure you can call it a cover, all things considered. That said, Sakrament is not a bad folk album. From the very first beat of the opener on, you are greeted with various string instruments, percussions, and flutes, all culminating in an upbeat mid-tempo melody. And this is probably the biggest diversion from Subway to Sally, the tone. While I didn't make out all of their songs, Subway to Sally never shied away from very grim and dark topics, be it spree killing, child abuse, or attempted suicide. You will not really find much of that on Sakrament, however. The whole album has a far more positive and even sort of happy vibe to it, and the opener represents that very well, I feel. And this not only shines through the compositions but also the lyrics. The opener, Lebenslinien, is about defying your fate in some ways, not living by what seems predestined for you, but rather making your own way in the world, even if it might not be the easiest thing to do. Hilf mir zu glauben, on the other hand, is about getting strength from others to basically look over all the bad things in the world, to believe in a bright future. This track packs out some strings and stompy, heavy percussions with playful acoustic guitar shining through again and again. In the hook, it's all laid on heavier and accompanied by a flute on top. The track Doch ich weiß es, which features the German band Santiano, is basically the polar opposite content-wise and maybe the darkest song of the whole album. It's about not being able to close your eyes from all the evils in our world, and that pretending to do so would just exactly be that, pretending. But I have to say that I found the melody here really not reflective of that. Very akin to the opener, this track has a pretty upbeat melody, which is somewhat puzzling as a combination here. In this track, Eric Fish also apparently attempts to sound a little more, I don't know, serious, evil maybe? It really doesn't pan out in my opinion. Eric Fish has a very distinct voice. You will recognize him amongst hundreds of singers guaranteed. And he is not the worst singer either, but vocal spectrum was just never his strong point, and it certainly isn't here. And last but not least, I also have to say regarding this track, I didn't really notice the involvement of Santiano here. I mean, it pretty much just sounds like the rest of the tracks. Johanna Krins, meanwhile, delivers high-pitched, soprano-esque vocals. I think she is a pretty good contrast to Eric Fish's vocals, actually. But very much like Fish, her vocal spectrum seems to be somewhat limited. She hits every note just fine, she never seems to struggle with the higher ones either, but this super clean high pitch is also apparently everything she can bring to the table. And given we are dealing with a formula here that has been explored for many years by most of the band members already, the addition of female vocals really doesn't bring that much fresh wind into the whole thing if you are familiar with their works that they released before this. And usually I try not to draw too many direct comparisons to other bands in my reviews, but this one is just so very obvious. This album carries so much of the aesthetic and DNA of Subway to Sally in it, it just can't be denied. If I'd have heard this album not knowing under what label it was published, I would have immediately said it was a Subway to Sally folk album. It's basically the same music, really, only ditching the electric instruments and elements from Subway to Sally, even though I'm sure some things on this album were still sampled in. Nonetheless, I also feel that the band produced a really fine folk album here. Last but not least, due to the experience they all have, these band members know how to craft good music by now, and that is exactly what they did here. Many songs are incredibly catchy, and chances are that if you like folk, at least one of the songs on this disc will stick with you if you want it to or not. Be it the upbeat composition of the opener, the somewhat melancholic string-laden hook of Fährmann, or the calm, slow-paced, woeful love song Lebewohl with its mix of percussion, acoustic guitar and violin. If anything, I really felt that there were too many tracks on this album that could be seen as the sort of woeful, slightly dark love songs with what I felt like was about 1/4 of the album. And with over 50 minutes, it also somewhat overstayed its welcome for me. This might also be because I sort of knew this music before I heard it already, so if you are new to this whole style, it might be something entirely different for you. But by the end of it, I was actually a bit tired of it. One or two tracks less might have done it some good, but as I said, this might also be because to me it felt like listening to another Subway to Sally album, which is a band I'm listening to for over 15 years by now. It certainly didn't help that this album is somewhat dime a dozen folk music. I mean, it's very well done folk music, absolutely no question about it. And unlike bands like Schandmaul, which started out in folk and then basically turned into shallow pop, this is what I would call quote unquote real folk music. This really doesn't come as a surprise either, seeing just how experienced the crew around Eric Fish is with these kinds of instruments, and Johanna Krins having a folk background herself too. And I also feel it shows because the whole album feels played with confidence and skill, right down to the mix, which is really well done too, in my opinion. Instruments get a little bit more presence when needed, but at the same time, you can hear details shine through when they need it too, like the aforementioned acoustic guitar interjects in the background of Hilf mir zu glauben. But overall, in terms of quantity, a little bit less would have been more to my liking. Last but not least, because the compositions do lack some really standout moments here. As good as Sakrament is, and it's really quite good, by the end of the day, I'd be somewhat hard pressed to call it something really special or revolutionary in any way. So, as a conclusion, the debut of Bannkreis is solid without a doubt. Given that Eric Fish and his colleagues have decades of experience behind them, I also didn't expect anything else, to be honest. At the same time, however, this project has to do something lest it wants to get thrown in with Subway to Sally forever, because it does sound just so very similar. If that is a good or bad thing is probably down to how much you know the style already. If you are new, this could be a great entry point to Subway to Sally too, because I'm pretty sure that if you like this Bannkreis album, you will probably like some of Subway to Sally's material. If you are a veteran, however, you will maybe miss the innovation we saw with Subway to Sally over the years before that is just plain lacking here. Judging it on its own, however, Sakrament is a good, fun album, striking a balance between upbeat, happy, and melancholic songs. This album delivers you over 50 minutes of fine German medievalish folk music, and if that's what you want, it's absolutely worth checking out. You don't get any more on this album, but also not a single note less. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you did, please leave a thumbs up on the video, and if you didn't like it, we have a button for that too. And if you have listened to this album, feel free to tell me in the comments what you thought about it. And if you want at least one weekly music review from an artist or band you probably never heard about before, just subscribe to the channel. You can also follow Sounds German on Facebook or Twitter. I do usually post daily new music videos on there from all kinds of artists. I hope to see you again next time. Have a nice day. Salida.